Are we good? We're rolling, Bradley. He's the actual controller of this process. Right. Okay. Welcome, everybody. My name is Tom Turner. I'm the technical director for the Ohio Youth Soccer Association. I'm Visek from the George Washington University, and I have her details on the screen. She's associate professor in the Department of Exercise and Nutrition Sciences, and this has been an interesting journey and meeting with Amanda. I am trying to push this forward, Brad, and why won't it go? There we go. So I'm going to just briefly through it, just to give you an idea of what Amanda's background is. That's all her academic qualifications. I pulled out all the dates, Amanda.
No, thank you. I appreciate it.
You know, the UNC West Virginia things were kind of fine and standard, and then I saw the US Centers for Disease Control, and my ears popped up, and I thought, that ties directly in with this because it's public health.
Yeah.
And there's a significance in that relates to the FundMaps research, which we'll get to, but that shouldn't be overlooked. We're actually not talking to a soccer coach per se, although I couldn't find, were you involved in sports at all?
Of course.
I didn't ask you why. We've never had a conversation about which ones.
Yeah. Primarily figure skating. My younger brother played ice hockey and soccer. So
you're going to say like cross-country running.
But yeah.
Okay. So where the research started, at least relative to the FundMap, were these three publications, and the one in 2015 was the original publication, and then that spawned two later publications based on the same data. But as you can see in red at the bottom, these are by no means the only thing that Amanda's actually doing with her life at the George Washington University. So she's very busy. But these are the three journals that related specifically to our conversation today, which is the fund integration theory, or just FundMaps for those of us who are lay in the field. So the FundMaps projects have garnered international and national attention, and those are some of the media outlets that have contacted Amanda and said, tell us about FundMaps and what this means. So it's been a pretty interesting journey, I would think, and this might be a conversation in itself someday. Clearly going across the world. India would be an interesting link to this too, but it may be new to most of us, relatively speaking, but it's caught the attention in so many different media angles. So what's fun? And at this point, I'm going to ask everybody, if you would please, to play along, because this is where I think we start our conversation. When the research started, the link, the route to the question was, one thing that makes playing sports fun for players is, and there was a fill in the blank, and off they went. So Amanda, if you want to give us a little background just on that kind of piece of this, and we'll have, as the chat room is open, we'll have people fill in their responses, and we'll see how those things match up. But if you want to give us a little bit of a background just on the process, maybe of that part of going to the club, and then how did you come up with that, and what was their sort of initial response to it? Not line by line, but just in terms of their reaction.
Yeah, so we were really interested in identifying all of the things that make playing sports fun for players. And our participant pool for our studies have primarily been youth soccer. And so we really embedded ourselves in the youth soccer community and worked with them through this concept mapping process. And so what Tom has up here first is the first activity that the participants completed as part of this concept mapping process, which includes brainstorming activities, sorting activity, and then a rating activity. So this is the first part of the brainstorming. And so what we asked players, parents, and coaches to do was to brainstorm as many things as they could think of as possible that makes playing sports fun for players. And they generated as many ideas as they possibly could. And the reason that we asked this particular question is because we know from all of the sports science literature that's been done to date that fun is the #1 reason why kids play. It's also the #1 reason in terms of its absence and not having fun, why they drop out. But there wasn't and hasn't really been a framework for really understanding all of the different determinants of fun and how children kind of conceptualize that in their own mind. And so by mapping this, we were able to take all of their data and inputs and then aggregate that into these concept maps that are very easily read, understood, and translatable when you're working with different sport organizations, coaches, parents, and the like, in terms of giving them all the information, the knowledge that they need to take this rigorous science and to start to implement it in training sessions and in games.
Excellent. I can see we've got 2. There's got to be more. There's more than, well, we've got 24 people on the webinar. So again, if you're a mom and dad, or you're a coach, or you're a player, all of those groups were asked, weren't they, Amanda?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So we had representation. The largest participant pool came from players, and they ranged in age from U9 all the way up to U19. They were equally stratified across girls and boys, and then also across recreational and more highly select travel teams as well.
Starting to get momentum.
Oh, this is great.
Starting to look somewhat familiar.
Yeah, so we have everything here from the thrill of competition and winning, being connected to friends and teammates, sharing a similar interest, the social interactions that come with those team dynamics, the satisfaction, excuse me, of achieving goals after working really hard, being with friends, learning, being part of a team, the challenge and joy of winning, making new friends. Very good. Very good. Playing with the team. Anything that brings joy and causes you to lose track of time in the moment. Very good. Running and being active. Great. Testing yourself, challenging yourself. Very good. Being free from adult supervision even. Yep.
That was me. That was what I think I remember as a kid. Because we played a lot on our own.
Yeah.
We made our own decisions, we did our own thing.
Yeah, which kids are, they're in a position to have to do a lot more of that now. Yeah, so this is great. So Tom, I don't know what you have planned next. How do you want to segue into what the findings actually are?
I will push if I can. If anyone's still writing and you want to just put your thoughts up there, feel free to do that. But I threw this up, Amanda, because it was interesting in tying some things together, because I thought this might have been a personal mission statement that you created, and it may have been something that you just took from somewhere, but it seems to me this is the driving motivation for what you do. And it relates back to that comment about the public health.
Yep.
So where did this come from, and is that assumption correct, or?
No, it is. I mean, these are my words exactly. And I think to just give some context in terms of how this research has evolved and the driving philosophy behind it is, given my education and background and training, which is in sports psychology, which is primarily tends to be synonymous with high performance, high level sport, and helping athletes and teams to optimize that performance under every circumstance possible. And during my graduate training, I also developed a keen interest in working with youth athletes and doing the same. In terms of not just optimizing their performance outcomes, but thinking about it in terms of how do we actually enhance these sporting experiences that they have as children and as adolescents that's going to stay with them longer term, and give them those skills and that interest and ability to be physically active throughout their lifespan. And so for me, I have really seen sport as a solution to many public health crises, one of which is overweight, obesity, and the onset of chronic diseases that are more and more frequently occurring in younger and younger populations. And so if we can improve the sport experience for children, I think that it can absolutely be a solution to a lot of these health outcomes that we're facing. If we know that from all the literature and science that's been done to date, that fun is the #1 reason why kids play, and lack or an absence of fun is the #1 reason why they drop out, then what we really wanted to do was to hone in on that concept and really work to engage young athletes, parents, and coaches into this translational type of science that can provide the foundation and a framework through these maps so that we can provide better sporting experiences for young athletes.
And that is the nutshell. I think that was exactly where that came from. So the results broke down into this. Amanda, I'm just putting that as a prompt.
It's a prompt for me.
Yeah, it's a prompt.
Okay.
Got it. Some of the results that came through in the chat box are going to fit directly into these categories.
Yeah, absolutely. So starting with that brainstorming focus prompt, which was one thing that makes playing sport fun for players is, and we had over 140 players, like I said, U9 all the way up to U19, girls and boys, stratified by rec and travel. We had parents, we had coaches as well that participated and contributed all of their ideas. So you can just imagine with each independent person generating all of their different ideas that make playing sport fun for them, that in the end, when you pull all that data together, you're going to get thousands of different ideas. And so what we did is we took all of that data and then analyzed it. And what we found was that there were 81 specific fun determinants. So very specific actions and behaviors that represented all the thousands of ideas that were generated. And so what you'll come to see here shortly is that all of the ideas that everyone on this webinar today has contributed through the chat box are represented in what's called the fun maps. And so the fun maps essentially take these 81 fun determinants that players, parents, and coaches identified. and provides a visual framework for understanding how all of these things fit together, and gives us really important data in terms of what's most important and what's least important. And so after we worked with all the players, parents, and coaches to identify these 81 fun determinants, we went back to them and we said, you all did a brilliant job, right? You essentially took this 3-letter word, fun, and you distilled it down into 81 specific actions and behaviors. So now we need you to help us understand, how do all of these different determinants fit together? How are they distinct? How are they similar? And so what we did is we placed each of those 81 determinants on a laminated index card for the players. And they essentially sat and got a deck of cards, and we asked them to pile sort them in a way that made sense to you. And as you're sorting these ideas into piles, give each pile a name based upon why you put it with the other cards. And once you take all of that sorting data, and then you aggregate it as well with the rating data. So immediately after they sorted all of these ideas on iPads, we asked them to also rate how important each of these 81 things are on a scale of 1 to 5, from less important to most important. And so when we take all of this data, we aggregate it together, we're able to produce these 3-dimensional maps called fun maps that display this highly sophisticated multivariate data in very simple visual illustrations.
And I apologize, I don't have one of those.
Yeah.
But I want to, we can flip forward to this, and I want to just go back a couple of slides. These are the 11 groupings that came out. And if you want to, if I could, without giving this away, because we've got a clear distinction between the first 2 tiers, can I ask the people on the call, what would be the most important piece for them? If we looked at just the 11 groups that you see in front of you, what would be the most important in terms of what you feel is the most fun about the game? Because as you looked at your own comments in the chat room, those should relate pretty quickly to one of the dimensions or the elements of the groups that you see here. Can I ask you to do that, just to look and see specifically if it's tier 1, Alex, you put that one, would that be more towards the team dynamics or the positive coaching, the trying hard? Or if you look at something from the second tier, what from the 6 would it be? Or if you like swag and that's the most important thing that's fun for you, that would be curious just to see where your thinking is, because then Amanda will talk about how maybe the groupings between 1 and 2 versus 3, what that nuance was really in some ways.
Being a teacher, it comes out the idea of positive coaching and positive team dynamics, and how that represents into the bigger picture of the classroom or whatever, if that makes sense.
You're a little fuzzy, Alex, but I think I got that. You were talking more about the positive team dynamics and the relationship to classroom dynamics.
Yeah, correct. That's correct.
Right. Okay, thank you. So this is interesting, watching this unfold in real life in front of us here. This is great.
Mm-hmm.
Live research.
No, it's great. Yeah. Good feedback.
So Amanda, maybe if you could just chat a little bit about how these fell out and maybe how you distinguish the tier 1 group from the tier 2 group versus, say, team 3
Yeah.
or tier 3.
So referencing back Tom's previous slide, right, there were 81 specific fun determinants that on average the players sorted into what we call 11 fun dimensions or factors, right? So when we asked them to sort, for the most part, on average, they sorted into 11 different groups. And those groups are trying hard, positive team dynamics, positive coaching, Then we have learning and improving, games, practices, team friendships, mental bonuses, game time support, team rituals, and swag. So remember, the third rating activity that we asked them to do was to help us distinguish what is most important from what is least important. So they did a brilliant job of identifying all of these 81 specific fun determinants. They sorted it in a way that made sense to them so that we as adults have a conceptualization of how these things fit together. So these 11 fun factors make up those 81 fun determinants. And now, as a coach or a sport organization, even a parent, I want to know, well, what's most important from what's least important, right? I want some directional indicator on where am I going to get the biggest return on investment for my efforts and my resources if there are 81 specific fun things. So when we looked at that rating data, what we found is that trying hard, positive team dynamics, and positive coaching were consistently rated at the very top, number one, number two, and number three, regardless of players' age. So the younger kids compared to the older kids, their sex, so girls versus boys, as well as recreational versus travel. So essentially what we're saying and what we're finding here is that no matter how you splice the data, no matter how you look at the various different ways that we can organize children in athletics, this is generally the same message that we're finding, is that they place the greatest importance on determinants that define trying hard. So giving good effort, going all out, being strong and confident, competing, positive team dynamics in terms of coordinated effort, getting along, supporting their teammates, and then all of the 12 different determinants of positive coaching. So having a coach that has a lot of knowledge about the sport, who is encouraging, allows mistakes, stays positive, and so on. Those are the determinants and the factors that players place the greatest importance. At the very bottom is team rituals and swag. So it's interesting because swag includes the equipment that we have, like all of those different types of things. And a lot of times parents will become surprised that swag isn't actually higher up on the list in terms of importance, because they always talk about how, you know, their kids are nagging them for new cleats or this new piece of equipment. And when you take each of these things, these fun determinants, and you pit them against one another in terms of importance, we get really clear data about what really drives fun for girls and boys, rec and travel, younger and older kids. And so you have trying hard, positive team dynamics, and positive coaching that's always up here at the top. You have team rituals and swag that consistently come in at the bottom. So I think what's important to understand here is because they're at the bottom does not mean that they are not important. They do contribute to the positive, fun experience, but they're not as important as the things in the second and the third, the second and the first tier. And then consistently bundled in the middle are these factors: learning and improving, games, practices, team friendships, mental bonuses, and game time support, that are always clustered in the center here. And so there was a very distinct break in how the young athletes rated these things across these three different tiers.
Excellent. And let me flip back to the, come here, just the comparison between the groups. Oops, hold on, back up, go the other way. Yeah, just the only real significance there is the bottom one in terms of finding between the groups. I'll just cue that one up in a moment.
Yeah. So you can see here the way that Tom has some of these findings displayed, that there was basically 96 or 93 to 96% agreement between younger and older, boys and girls in rec and travel, and how they rated all of the 81 determinants, which is profound in any type of psychological and social science research. But at the same time, it's very consistent with everything that we find in developmental psychology, neuropsychology, developmental, like all the different disciplines where sex and gender are looked at so highly. And we actually find that males and females, girls and boys are more similar than we are different. But because of social norms and expectations and stereotypes, we tend to treat girls and boys differently. And we also tend to do that with recreational versus travel players and younger kids versus older kids, right? There tends to be a pronounced emphasis on the ways in which we are different rather than all the ways in which we are similar. And so what we're finding through this data really is that the messaging is the same. So when it comes to how do we provide the most optimal fun sport experiences for kids, it's through these 81 fun determinants that encompass athlete development.
So let me back up to this one, Amanda, because of all the things that I discovered in reading through and connecting to my own interests as a coach, that was one I would have hoped for on a sort of a blue Sunday in September.
Yeah.
And it was a pretty consistent finding, that cue.
In terms of where does winning rank amongst the 81 fun determinants? Yeah.
Yeah, but also
right?
between the parents and the players, because it was really interesting, because we always accuse parents of one thing and the reality is quite different.
Yeah, so I mean, what we found really is that when we compared the players to parents, that in terms of the players reported relative importance of those 81 determinants, 11 fun factors, that when we ask parents, you know, what is their understanding of what they think is most important for their child athlete, that there was actually quite high congruence, agreement between what players and parents are finding, or reporting rather. The real distinction came when we compared players to coaches. And when we did that, we looked at separating the younger players and their coaches from the older players and their coaches, right? Because we know that fun is the number one reason why kids play. It's the number one reason why they drop out in terms of not having fun. And when you look at that data, we lose the majority of kids between the ages of 9 and 13 years of age, and it's largely because it's not fun. So we thought it really important to look at the data in this developmental age range difference to see what we were finding. And you can see here from the numbers, these are correlation coefficients, these are numbers, and they can range from -1 to +1 depending upon whether we have a positive or a negative association between the players and the parents, or the players and the coaches. And so what you can see here for the younger players and their coaches, that R value range from 0.77 up to 0.90, which is quite high. A perfect correlation between two would be a 1.0, right? So these are very high values. Where we found a significant drop-off in difference in comparing those younger players and their coaches to the older players and coaches, you can see here the R value drops significantly down to 0.66 to 0.71. And so what that's telling us then is that the older players' coaches, their understanding of what is most important to least important to players is actually incongruent.
That was also interesting. So I'm going to go forward through the specifics of the 81 determinants. the factors here, because for most looking at this, well, trying hard is just a headline. What is it underneath that actually is explained in actions and behaviors by players? How do these actually relate to real things, real tangible actions and feelings that we have as players? I'm going to apologize for the box on the left and the little arrows that are going to come out until I flip through this, because it was for another use of this, but it's I'll leave the boxes up here without going forward to bring the arrows in. But if we can ask the players maybe to respond to the parents, is there anything in here that resonates with you? I think some of you said competing. Are there any other labels in here that you would regard as fun that would then relate to trying hard for you in a specific way?
Do you want them to contribute those ideas to the chat
Yeah,
box,
yeah,
Tom, or
please.
audio?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Some of the players or even some of the coaches would or anyone on the call, if someone has a connection with some of the specific elements of trying hard. I would have said as a 14-year-old playing rough.
So Scott
Yeah,
Zachary said making a good play and playing well during a game.
Yeah. And as the responses are coming in, where Amanda and I connected with our professions really was the boxes on the left actually relate to what we as coaches do for players and how we think about our job as coach. And when Scott and Zachary put a statement like that up, making a good play and playing well during the game, that relates directly to what I do as the coach. Because if I don't do my job to help a player understand, I'm not maximizing your development. I'm not maximizing what you would consider as fun. So Scott, I think that relates directly to the relationship between the fun maps research and how it's working into coaching education. So we've just got one. There's going to be a lot of lines come out and we'll move into the next one. Sorry.
Well, you might, Tom, I think since the lines are all going to come in, I think it's worth noting to the any technical director or the coaches that are on the call how you've mapped these fun determinants back to the 6 tasks of a coach.
Yep. You're turning the tables on me. That's sneaky. Right. So let's just take the one with the most connections, which is leading the player. One of the main tasks that we have as a coach is trying to help individual players. And I think this relates to one idea, which is we never coach teams. We always coach players to improve their play so that the team gets better. And in this particular case, the idea of leading the player relates 9 times to the areas under trying hard, the elements under trying hard. So there are 9 things that relate my job as a coach to anyone's job as a player. How do I get to maximize your potential and your enjoyment and your fun? And it relates to 9 of the elements in the determinant of trying hard. Coaching, leading the player, which is 5. Coaching the training sessions, all areas that I as an adult and me as a coach have to, the more I understand about this, the more it drives the way I think about my job as coach, which then is the complement to fun map research. Right. So positive team dynamics, Amanda. Can I ask what you took from this? Is did you have conversations with the people afterwards, or was it just simply taking information from them and just using data, or were there conversations that related to this? Because the positive team dynamics seemed to be one of the key responses in the chat room as we started this.
You mean, like, did we have conversations after we'd analyzed the data back with the
Was there any point
or-
where, was there any point where you went back and just discussed how a particular determinant was so popular, or got so many responses, or resonated in some way with the players or the coaches or the parents?
I mean, so what the athletes are saying comes through the data, right? And so when we collected that brainstorming data, we did it in several different ways. One was doing small focus groups. Another was, having the players generate as many ideas as they could on a piece of paper and contributing their thoughts that way. And doing the smaller focus groups with some of the players, they're quite animated and forthcoming and sharing their experiences and getting into, fine detail and even acting out some of these determinants. And I think that was, over the course of doing this research, and then also how we have translated this stuff over into Sweden, working with the different sport confederations over there, is that what we're finding is that, this makes sense. And a big part of team sports is that team camaraderie and the high dynamics and interactions that occur between teammates that plays an integral role in the experience.
I'm curious, this is live research again, for the players who are listening. If you had a choice, if you're an aspiring player, what's more important to you? Staying with your teammates that you play with currently, or moving to new teammates because there's a different mentality with those players? So if you aspire to a level that your current teammates don't, would you leave or would you stay? Thank you, Andy.
Yeah, and Scott and Zachary said staying with current teammates.
Yeah, that's really an interesting thought, because there's you would suspect that there are some players who might decide to move on, but I think many people would decide to stay because the teamships and the team dynamics may be as if not more important than maybe looking down the road and thinking, well, I could play here, I could play there. The team dynamics outweigh that, which is really interesting in itself. So we'll move forward here. Leading the team, again, rated high, so not necessarily the coaching games, coaching training sessions. So the positive coaching. If you had to wave a magic wand, Amanda, what would you do with the coaching world to help us all bring this to life?
I mean, I guess I'm trying to do that by, sharing the fun maps widely and as extensively as possible. I think what's really important, though, is we can look at these 12 specific determinants of what young athletes define as positive coaching. And if you look at those, not kind of in totality with all of the other fun determinants, particularly with trying hard and positive team dynamics, there's essentially this interrelated sort of domino effect that occurs. So if you have a coach that is doing all of these things that you see here that are listed, these 12 fun determinants that define positive coaching, then you're inherently going to create a training and game environment that is positive and that is conducive to supporting one another and highly coordinated effort and high motivation from individual players that leads to learning and improving. So to me, it's just quite phenomenal the way that players were able to identify these 81 fun determinants, of which 12 are positive coaching. So I think compared to the other 10 factors, positive coaching includes the greatest number of fun determinants among the 81. And I think that, positive coaching being in that first tier of importance for players really highlights the significant role and influence that a coach has in the sporting experiences of a young athlete.
There's a coach who allows mistakes while staying positive.
Mm-hmm.
We don't use mistakes as a necessary part of learning. We don't use them as checks for understanding. I don't think we teach coaches to look at players and say they've made a mistake. They're not trying to screw up. They just didn't have the skills to solve the problem at the time. And it changes the relationship between the player and the coach when you look at mistakes as just failings of skill and not attempts to embarrass the coach, which I think many of us, as we've gone through this journey, we might look at players not playing well as perhaps reflections on our own limitations in being able to help them. That's been a real thrust in the last 4 to 5 to 6 to 10 years of just evolution of what the coaching message is, and that's maybe one way this has now resonated in a specific coaching education process. It's not just a line on a page, it's got real life to it and real application.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the other thing that we're finding in the ongoing fun maps research that we're doing overseas in Sweden with ice hockey and basketball is that consistent, I think, with the American youth soccer players that contributed and participated in this particular study that developed the original fun maps is that, what kids are talking about that they want that makes the experience more fun is a coach that can create that open environment where they feel free to create and to try new things and to take a chance, because that's really part of the process of learning and improving, and then to be able to get that feedback in terms of whether what they just did, failed or they succeeded. They ultimately learn something out of that experience, and they want to train and compete in a psychologically and emotionally safe environment where they feel like they can do that.
This is probably the notion of we're in this together. It's not I'm the coach and you're the player. That's a completely different concept in coaching as well, isn't it? And it kind of relates to that. We will try to get better together. It's not me, the coach, talking to you, the player. It's us trying to do things together.
Yeah, and that should be a driving philosophy of team sports, right?
Yeah. It also feeds, I think going back to the team dynamics, that in many ways, it's interesting that you've probably lumped the coaching piece in here, but it relates absolutely to the positive team dynamics. The coaching in many ways steers the team dynamics. And if the coach doesn't understand or isn't capable of developing positive team dynamics, all the positive coaching in the world, it's almost an oxymoron, right? You don't understand what positive coaching is.
Yeah. So it goes back to how interrelated all of these 11 fun factors are to one another. For sure.
Amanda, this is Brett Evans. I've got a question just based on the previous slide to this one. I think it's slide 12, Tom. And it talks about the value in staying with teammates and progressing with teammates, yet we live in a performance culture which says we want to promote kids up a pathway, and that might mean leaving your team and going to the next team up. Is that something you're suggesting be done in consultation with the player? If the player's less comfortable with it, are they better off staying where they are?
In terms of, are you asking whether or not a player should stay with their current team versus moving to another team?
Correct.
That's obvious. That's an individual player decision. I guess the driving question that I would ask is, what would moving to another team provide for that player?
Sure. I think that the context was based on moving to a higher level team, not moving from a lateral move. It would be moving from a team at maybe a B level to an A level.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think it really depends upon what the goal of the child athlete is, right? So my philosophy is always to go back and be very athlete centered, and asking the player those questions in terms of what is it that they want. I think that the assumption always is that they have to move to a different level in order to progress and to learn. And it's interesting because in the United States, I think that our culture is very ladder driven, right? It's this hierarchy that defines American culture in terms of moving up that competitive ladder or that pyramid, whatever the metaphor is. And the idea that you have to jump from one level to the next level in order to improve. And that is really contrasted very differently in Sweden in their sport structure. So over there, when we talk to the athletes about, is, competing to play at the next level something that, is really fun, or that is a determinant of fun. And they really struggle to understand that, because in their culture, you tend to stay with the same teammates and continue to develop within that team. And this idea of moving up a structured ladder to higher and higher levels doesn't really exist in the same way in their sport culture. So I think what I would go back to or recommend is asking the athlete, the player, what it is that she or he really wants, and then really starting to take a step back and think about, does them playing at a higher level or playing on a different team, is that a pivotal part of, is it a pivotal part of their development? Have they maxed out their ability to play where they're at or to grow and to develop in that way?
I think Josh McMillan has a related question that deals with the parent influence. Now, Josh,
also, to go back to Brad's question too, I think, one of the other determinants, one of the other 81 determinants here is playing with the same teammates year after year. That's not, the players didn't group that into positive team dynamics. They grouped that more, I believe, into team friendships, which ranks number 7 down in that second tier. But I do think that no matter what team a child athlete is playing on, what they're telling us through this research is that positive team dynamics and developing that good rapport and that supportive environment of one another is key to having a fun sport experience for them.
Josh, do you want to chime in? Is Josh live to go, Brad?
There's 6 of them, 2 of them.
Mike, hello?
Josh?
Oh,
Yeah, you're there.
yeah. The question I've had, and I've asked this too, I asked at the convention, a couple other places, is how do you handle the exception though, where a child is happy where they are, whether regardless of the age?
Yeah.
What do you do when you handle if a kid can move up?
Okay.
They don't want to, but the parents' goal for that kid is higher. Like when you have the parents of grandeur, like my kid's going to be the next D1, my kid's going to be the next US women's whatever. How do you facilitate that relationship between parent and the player and say, look, I know mom and dad, you want them to go, but if you push them, might push them out of the game, like we had talked about earlier.
I mean, I think part of it is you're right on point in terms of challenging back those questions to mom and dad or the guardians. And I think really drilling home, you know, have you asked your child what she or he wants, right? And it's when those player needs are not being met, right, that children stop having fun and they ultimately drop out. So I think, you know, again, it kind of goes back to our sport culture and this idea of, you know, in America, it's always about, you know, we got to play, we got to get to the next level, and the whole vicarious experiences and helicopter parents and living through our child, and our child's going to be up here, they're going to be at the top. And, you know, going back to asking, you know, what is it that your child athlete wants and needs, and meeting them where they're at? Because as soon as those needs aren't being met, then the goals and aspirations that parents have for their children are less likely to be achieved.
Thanks, Josh. Amanda, this is a professional question from me with no expectation of an answer either way. The team dynamics clearly have to be positive. The coach has to be positive. What if I can't help my players get any better? So I'm a positive human being and I just don't have the background to improve my players. Which one trumps? Do you have any idea that I don't, it's not a loaded question. I think I can answer the question in all sorts of different ways. So it's not a,
Yeah.
it's just out of curiosity. If can I be a good human being and not a good soccer coach, and have more of an influence than if I'm a good soccer coach but not a particularly good human being? That might be the way to look at this.
I mean, I think there are pros and cons to both, right? You have athletes that have had, you know, their coaching style or tactics are not ones that we would probably endorse, but yet those, you know, those players have continued to develop and to grow. You also have, you know, you can be in a situation where you have a coach who, I guess, to use your words, is a wonderful human being, but lacks knowledge of the sport or the ability to teach and to coach in such a way that the kids are learning and improving. So, you know, there are pluses and minuses to both.
I could argue both sides of that for an hour as well.
Yeah, that's a whole separate discussion. Yeah.
Yeah, it's good. So we're getting close to time, and just in respect to people's time, we'll just let them see how the rest of the tournaments play out, and then a summary at the end for perhaps the coaches who are involved with us. The yellow for me was one that we as coaches cannot necessarily influence. There were two of these of the 81. The idea of game time support and what players and probably coaches as well would appreciate is consistent refereeing, but it's one of two that within the 81 that we can't influence. Mm-hmm. I'm just looking to see if there's anything else that highlights from this group. We'll wander through the remaining boxes, because somebody asked at the end, they wanted to see something specific. I think So, and I'm going to map this out again because something like playing time, it really relates to what we do with games and coaching and training. But I think in many ways, in your favorite position, a lot of the time we don't play in positions that almost lead back into making good decisions and good plays in the game. It's a challenge if we don't help players understand what it means to play the game because there's just that drill world. So practices specifically, yeah. And we'll move to just the last 2 or 3. So mental bonuses was one of the questions that someone asked earlier. What was ignoring the score, Amanda? Was there a backstory for that answer?
A lot of the kids talked about, when they're completing that sentence stem, one thing that makes playing sports fun for players is, and when we had focus group discussions around this, many of them talked about how not paying attention to the score, ignoring the score made it more fun sometimes.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I think in context, I think what they're getting at, what the players are getting at is that, being so outcome driven and focusing on that impedes your ability to be in the moment, not only to enjoy what it is that you're doing and having fun, to really focus your attention on the here and the now. So the mindfulness sense of being in the moment. And more focused on the process, right? I mean, when you use another thing about the score is to use the score as information and information only, and not necessarily the goal of a competition in terms of I mean, we all want to win, teams will win, but it's ultimately not the most important thing. When it comes to having fun, and fun is essentially synonymous with athlete development, when you study these 81 specific fun determinants, what the players are saying is that paying attention to the process, those moment-to-moment experiences that are occurring in practices and training sessions and in competition games, that it's those things that are what makes the experience fun, not necessarily the sole outcome of a game, which is, again, that's part of our culture. That's part of the professionalization of youth sport, is to be very focused on what the outcome of a game is. But typically what we find is that, when you ask athletes, I'll go back to a participant a player that participated in several of our studies over the years. And when the Fun Maps research first came out, the Washington Post did a study and they asked to interview some of the participants. And this one particular player volunteered, and the reporter asked him, tell me about the most fun experience that you've had all season so far. And he takes them through, recounting this one specific game and everything that happened in that game, and how highly competitive it was and how hard they had to work together. And the reporter asked at the end, well, did you win or did you lose? And he said, our team lost. But that was the most fun that I had had all season long, hands down.
It's being in a zone. It doesn't happen very often. When it does, it's special. You lose it? Oh. Hello?
We're right here, 5 o'clock.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we're good. So I'll throw this up just so people can see it, but that really is our little journey through the Fun Maps today. Is there anything in summary or big messages for us to take away as we come to the end of our time? Because this has been fast, furious, but really enjoyable and educational as always. Is there a big message that we can take away?
I think for me, one of the big things that I try and spread in terms of getting sport organizations and coaches really to understand is that fun is synonymous with athletic development, right? So when you have the opportunity to examine the fun maps and all the 81 determinants, and I'm happy to share, there's this really fun infographic. If you guys are on Twitter, that's pinned at the top of my page. You can grab that, use it as you wish. But it's a really visual way to take these scientific studies that I've been able to distill down into this one infographic frame. That when you study that infographic, you walk away with a true understanding of all 81 fun determinants, how they're grouped into these 11 fun factors, and that fun is really synonymous with athletic development. So fun is not this like meaningless word, right? We know it has such high significance for keeping kids in the game. And what we have to better understand through the science that we've done so far is that what the players are saying is that fun is athletic development, right? It's not goofing off and playing around and not being on task. They're saying that in order to create the most fun experiences for them, they want coaches, they want sport organizations, they want their teammates, and they want their parents to act on these 81 specific determinants. And the more of those that we can foster and promote and do, the better sport experiences that we can provide. Because the more fun that kids are having, the more they're going to develop as players and the longer that they are going to stay in the game. So not only does fun have this huge public health relevance in terms of keeping kids active for as long as possible, but it has this huge significance when it comes to player development and medals and podiums and high performance, right? So we tend to look at these things as highly differential and contrasting goals, when in fact, we can meet all of them concurrently if we just focus on what is fun.
Hey, thank you. Keep cheerleading. Keep cheerleading right here.
Like I said, I'm on Twitter if you want to follow me on there. The infographic that I was just referring to, I pinned up at the top of the page. You guys are free to use that, download it in whatever way you want, spread it, spread the fun. That's what I say. And then when it comes to, if you're interested in the scientific papers, those are all available online through PubMed. But if you'd like the glossy, nicely formatted journal published versions of those in e-form, you can email me. It's just A Visek, so A, B as in Victor, ISEK @gwu.edu. You can just Google Amanda Visek and GW, and you can find all my information. And email me, direct message me on Twitter. I'm happy to share all that with you. And I think Tom was so kind today to also share with you the book chapter, which should be helpful as well. So
thank you, Amanda.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Thank you for coming, sharing time with us.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Stay safe.
You too.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, bye.
Thank you.